be quite easy to slip into a downside scenario if we do see a multi-country war. It's not our expected case, but of course the risk of a third world war is not that far off at the moment.
South Africa's fuel prices are skyrocketing. There is an additional R2 increase muted for April. But how high can petrol prices go? Joining me to discuss is Annabel Bishop, Chief Economist at Investec. Annabel, welcome to the CRA channel. Could you tell our viewers what, in your view, is driving this escalation of petrol prices at the moment?
Yes, hi, thanks very much. Look, I think the Russian-Ukraine war has really caught the oil market quite substantially. We're seeing very elevated prices. You know, Brent crude oil is our main oil import, and of course now, we're producing, we're importing a lot of petroleum products as well, and all of these have been afflicted in what was a very tight oil market before the war started. So OPEC, the world's cartel that essentially controls oil prices, OPEC Plus, was obviously keeping the prices supportive, but they've also been battling to contain, they've also been battling as well to meet demand as economies around the world recover from COVID-19 lockdowns. And of course, this resumption in business activity did already see oil prices higher at the start of this year than last year, and of course also even higher than at periods in the year before that. Now what we're seeing is concerns about supply in terms of oil, but also of course as well with Russia, a major oil exporter, and many countries around the world starting to ban fossil fuel exports from Russia. This has further elevated oil prices.
All right, so oil prices are north of $120 a barrel. That's the highest since 2008. But, you know, in terms of broader economic effects, Annabel, is this going to have an impact on inflation? Obviously, it will in terms of the input costs for the production of food, so fuel and fertilizer, but also South Africa's transport industry is heavily dependent on fuel. Also, there's Eskom, which is a big consumer of diesel as well. So what are going to be the inflationary effects that we're going to see here domestically?
I think the oil price already has actually seen an elevation in petrol prices. And in fact, in February, we were actually close to looking to a R2 per litre increase because of the lift in the oil price that we saw at the time over January. But of course, the government absorbed most of it with their state levy fund. And going into March, we also saw quite a big petrol price increase. They only managed to absorb a bit. And as you quite rightly say, now moving into April, there's going to be an even larger petrol price increase coming through. And of course, you know, the petrol price now well above R20 a litre and quite likely to climb further. Look, from an inflationary perspective, your petrol prices have a weighting of perhaps, you know, close to 5% in the basket. So on its own, it does obviously push up inflation. But what's quite key here is that it has a broad-based effect. So, you know, while we do tend to see inflation increase in the months that the petrol price rises quite quickly because the increase is at the start of the month, we obviously then see these higher prices feeding through to a number of other areas. And of course, one of the concerns could be with load shedding, with Eskom resorting to more usage of its open gas cycle turbines, you know, obviously using heavy amount of diesel. And as your petrol and diesel, of course, paraffin and all other related prices go up, that then, of course, can have implications there for the energy utility, for consumers, for transport in the economy. That obviously has strong implications for the poor who make a substantial use of transport, and also of course as well second round effects going into food production, other areas. Of course, the Reserve Bank does tend to react with higher interest rates when we obviously see second round effects of inflation. I think I'd also just like to mention that we might get even more than a R2 per litre increase in the petrol price in April, because we haven't completed the month of March. We're actually at the start, not the end. And of course, your petrol price increases are calculated on the average of the previous month. So, you know, the worry certainly is that if government doesn't do as it suggested it would do in the budget, start to reduce its many taxes that it has on the fuel price, we would start to see these increases coming through. So, you know, South Africa's fuel price is made up of a lot of government tax. It's a large contribution, and cutting or even eliminating a lot of these would actually shield consumers from higher prices, because the risk is that oil goes towards $150 a barrel or even $200 a barrel if this war exacerbates and gets worse. And then, of course, the oil price might be heading very substantially higher.
And you don't think additional supply is going to come on stream from the shale gas producers in the United States? I mean, I suppose that will take a long time. There'll be a lag effect. But you think that there's a chance that supply might rise again? Also, potentially policy changes from OPEC?
So yeah, in the longer term, certainly, I think also as well, what we'll see is increased use of green technology, moving away from these fossil fuels, and that, of course, as well, will obviously be supportive of moves towards improving the outlook for climate change. But of course, in the immediate term, this week, next week, towards the end of March, it's quite hard to see how they can very rapidly put those measures in place, because already we've seen strategic oil reserves released. I think they will probably release more strategic oil reserves. The United States is a very large producer of oil, in fact, the world's largest producer, but doesn't actually export a lot of it. It keeps it in strategic reserves. And of course, as you've quite rightly said, the higher the oil price goes, and of course the WTI price now we're looking at, then obviously the more support there'll be for renewed fracking and of course oil exploration in the United States as well. So I think that we are obviously seeing a situation where for South Africa, we don't obviously have much choice because we import our oil instead of using our own oil. There's been large finds of oil off the west coast and of course near Namibia, but South Africa prefers to import its oil instead. And we are very heavy users of oil, and I think there's no chance in the near or even in the medium term that we're going to use away from our heavy oil usage in South Africa. So in the immediate term, unfortunately, we are likely to see these very high price pressures. I do think that we could find ourselves in a situation, as I said earlier, where government assists and absorbs some of the cost. But of course, we are obviously at risk of the petrol price otherwise moving towards 30 Rand a litre, if not 40 Rand a litre. Now, that would be catastrophic for South Africa's inflation rate if it moves there over the next few months. And of course, for businesses as well in South Africa, households and consumers. So I do feel that government could certainly step in there. And we saw in the budget that they are examining this and looking to do some work around it. We just don't know what's going to happen to this war. We saw the United States. We saw President Biden say in his State of the Union address that the US is very ready to step in. I think the words he uses, let us be crystal clear, that if any of the NATO allies are attacked, then the United States will go to war. And of course, in that type of scenario, it would be very, very, very difficult. Obviously fossil fuels would still be needed and used, but there'd also be concerns of a collapse in global economic growth. So there's a lot of uncertainty and it would be very difficult. But I think sticking with the scenario we're discussing at the moment, that the war does persist over this month and into next month, and we do see further elevation in pressures. Hopefully, we see a limitation in our petrol price increase at 2 Rand a litre, but of course there is that risk that it could be significantly higher.
All right, Annabel, well, just to close us off, what is the impact going to be on the Rand? Because we've seen other emerging market currencies, most notably, obviously, the ruble, taking a huge tumble. But what will be the impact on South Africa's currency?
Look, there are a couple of factors which really benefit the Rand. One, obviously, is that we are geographically very far removed from the war, but also, of course, as well, that we are a key commodity exporter. So we really are gaining from our commodity exports, providing a supportive environment for the domestic currency, and that's the price of these exports, going up substantially higher. So that bolsters our trade surplus, it bolsters our terms of trade, of course, even going to bolster our government finances. So we expect the Rand will average around 15.40 for the quarter, which it is doing, and in fact, actually quite near it as well on a spot basis. And we know that the quarter is almost finished. So going into the second quarter, we think the Rand could be slightly weaker, closer to 15.50. But it's a very uncertain environment. And I think we just need to bear in mind that there's a lot of risks, and it would be quite easy to slip into a downside scenario if we do see a multi-country war. It's not our expected case, but of course the risk of a third world war is not that far off at the moment.
Annabel Bishop, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. Let's hand over to you, our audience. What do you think the impact will be of the Ukraine war on energy prices going forward? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed this analysis and you would like to watch another video on energy policy in South Africa, you can do so by clicking here. Also, remember to subscribe to our channel. That's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.